I was elbow deep in my grandmother's garden when my phone buzzed on the porch railing. It was a Saturday in late October, one of those mornings where the air smells like wood smoke and cold dirt. And Grandma had asked me to help her dig up the dahlias before the first hard frost. She was 73 and her knees had gotten bad enough that she couldn't kneel anymore, so every fall I'd come over and do the digging while she stood nearby in her old barn coat, telling me which bulbs to keep and which ones had gone soft. It was one of my favorite days of the year, honestly. No noise, no drama, just the two of us and the smell of cold earth. I pulled off one glove and checked my phone. It was a text from my brother, not a call, a text, which should have told me everything. Hey, just wanted you to know. Me and Steph are moving into Grandma's house. We talked to her about it last spring. It's all settled. We're coming Sunday to start bringing boxes. I read it 3 times. Then I looked up at Grandma, who was watching a cardinal on the fence post with this peaceful look on her face, completely on her, unaware that her phone was probably sitting somewhere inside uncharged, which it always was, and that her grandson had apparently decided her house was already his. I didn't say anything to her right then. I set my phone face down on the railing and went back to digging, but my hands were shaking and it wasn't from the cold. My brother is 4 years older than me. His name is, well, doesn't matter what his name is. What matters is that growing up, he was the one who got away with everything. He's charming the way some people are charming. Effortlessly, and completely in service of himself. He could talk our parents into anything. He could make a teacher feel like they were the unreasonable one. He once convinced our grandfather to co-sign a car loan by showing up to dinner with flowers, and Grandpa knew, he absolutely knew he was being worked, and he still signed. His wife, Steph, is the same way, just quieter about it. She smiles a lot. She volunteers information about herself before you can ask any questions. She says things like, "We just want what's best for everyone," in a tone that makes you feel like arguing would make you a bad person. They'd been married 6 years, no kids. They rented a place about 40 minutes from here, that they'd always described as temporary, even though they'd lived there since before the wedding. I was the one who stayed close to Grandma after Grandpa died. I'm not saying that to make myself sound noble. I just genuinely liked being around her. I'd come over on weekends. I helped her figure out her Medicare paperwork. I drove her to her eye appointments. When her furnace broke in February 3 years ago, I was the one who slept on her couch for 4 nights until the repair guy could come out, because I didn't want her to be in a cold house alone. My brother came to Thanksgiving. He called on her birthday. He was present in the way that people are present when there's no effort required. After I left Grandma's house that Saturday, I sat in my car in her driveway for a long time. Here's what I knew. Grandma owned her house outright. Grandpa had paid it off before he died and left everything in a trust. The house, the savings account, a small piece of land behind the property. The trust had my grandmother as the primary beneficiary, and it named me and my brother as secondary beneficiaries after her. Equal shares. What that meant, in plain terms, was that neither of us had any claim to anything while Grandma was alive. The house was hers. She could invite whoever she wanted to live in it. She could sell it. She could will it to her church if she felt like it. But I also knew my grandmother. She was sharp in a lot of ways, but she was 73. She'd been lonely since Grandpa died, and she loved my brother with a specific, almost willful blindness that I'd watched my whole life. He was her firstborn grandchild. He could do very little wrong in her eyes. I didn't think she'd been coerced, exactly. I thought she'd been convinced. There's a difference. But it's a thin one when the person doing the convincing knows exactly which words to use. I drove home and I called my cousin Frederica, who is a paralegal, and the most practically minded person in our family. I told her what the text said. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Okay, but do you know if your grandma actually agreed to this? Or do they just want you to think she did?" That was the right question. I went back to Grandma's on Sunday morning, early, before my brother was supposed to arrive with boxes. She was at the kitchen table with her coffee, doing the crossword. I sat down across from her and I just asked her directly. I said, "Did you invite them to move in?" She looked up and her face did something complicated. Not guilty, exactly. More like she was bracing for a conversation she hadn't wanted to have yet. She said yes, they'd talked about it. She said the house was too big for her. She said it made sense for them to be there, keep the place up, maybe fix the back porch that had been sagging for 2 years. She said it would be nice to have company. I asked her what the arrangement was. She said they weren't paying rent. She said it was more of a, she paused, searched for the word, a family situation. I asked her if she'd talked to anyone about it. A lawyer, the trustee, anyone. She got a little stiff then. She said she didn't need a lawyer to decide what happened in her own home. I said I knew that. I said I wasn't trying to tell her what to do. I just wanted to make sure she understood what she was agreeing to, and whether there was anything in writing. There wasn't anything in writing. Here's the thing about my brother that took me a long time to understand. He doesn't think of himself as someone who takes advantage of people. He genuinely believes that things working out in his favor is just how things are supposed to work. That's the part that makes him hard to argue with. There's no guilt to appeal to. There's no moment where if you just explain it the right way, he'll see what he's doing. He just doesn't see it that way, and he never will. Steph is the same. They'd move into that house and within 6 months they'd be making decisions about it. Little ones first. Paint color for the hallway. Which furniture to move to the garage. then bigger ones. Whether to plant something in the garden, Grandma had kept the same way for 30 years. Whether to have people over. Whether Grandma's routine needed to adjust around theirs. I'd watched this happen before, not with Grandma specifically, but with people I knew. The way a household gradually stops belonging to the person who was supposed to be in charge of it. I wasn't going to let that happen without at least trying. I called Frederica again that afternoon and told her what Grandma had said. She told me to get the trust documents. She said she'd look at them. I knew where Grandma kept them, in the green accordion folder in the hall closet, the one that had important written on the tab in Grandpa's handwriting. Grandma let me photograph every page. She wasn't sure why I needed them, and she was a little impatient about it, but she let me. I sent the photos to Frederica. She called me back 2 days later. She said the trust was structured in a way that protected the assets from being transferred or encumbered, without a formal legal process. The house couldn't just be signed over informally. But more importantly, she said, the trust had a provision, a small one, almost buried in the language, that allowed any beneficiary to request an independent accounting if there was concern about the management of trust assets. And since my brother and I were both named beneficiaries, I had standing to request one. She said, and I want to be clear, she said this very carefully, I'm not saying anything improper has happened, but if they're living there rent-free and making decisions about the property without a formal agreement, that could create complications down the line. For everyone, including your grandma. I told her I understood. I asked her what I should do. She said, before anything else, get a real estate attorney to do a title search, just to see if anything's been filed or recorded that you don't know about. It cost me $312 and took about a week. The title search came back clean. Nothing had been filed. The property was still solely in the trust, exactly as Grandpa had set it up. But the attorney I'd hired, a woman named Ms. Wentworth, who specialized in estate matters and had the energy of someone who had seen every possible version of this story. She flagged something else. She said that if my brother and his wife established residency in the property without a formal lease or written agreement defining the terms, they could potentially claim tenant rights after a certain period of time, depending on how things were handled. It wasn't a certainty. It was a risk. She also said that the cleanest thing, if I was concerned about my grandmother's interests and the integrity of the trust, was to get a formal agreement in place. Not to kick them out, just to document the arrangement. What they were responsible for, what they weren't, what happened if things changed. She said sometimes families resist this because it feels cold. She said in her experience, the families who resist it are usually the ones who end up in probate court. I liked her immediately. I tried to bring it up with my brother. I texted him first. I figured if he got to tell me about this over text, I could at least start that way. I said I'd been thinking about the arrangement, and I thought it would be good for everyone to have something written down, just for clarity. He called me within 4 minutes, which is the fastest he has ever called me back for anything in my adult life. He said, I don't understand why you're making this into a thing. I said I wasn't making it into a thing. I said I just thought it was a good idea. He said Grandma was fine with it. I said I was sure she was, and I just thought having something in writing would protect her too. He said protect her from what? I said from any confusion later on. He said there wouldn't be any confusion. I said, then it should be easy to put in writing. There was a pause. Then he said he'd talk to Steph. He said they'd think about it. They moved in on Sunday anyway, 12 boxes and a rented furniture dolly and a long conversation with Grandma that I wasn't there for, which Steph later described to me as really healing. Things were fine for about 2 months. I kept visiting Grandma, maybe more than usual if I'm being honest, which I am. I told myself it was because I missed seeing her. That was true. It was also true that I wanted to see what was happening, what I noticed. Small things. The kitchen was rearranged. Grandma's china cabinet had been moved from the dining room to the hallway, to make room for a television my brother had brought from their old apartment. The guest room, which Grandma had kept set up for when my aunt visited, now had Steph's crafting supplies in it. My aunt would have to sleep in the small room off the kitchen. Grandma didn't seem upset about any of this. She seemed, I want to be precise here. She seemed like a person who had decided not to be upset about things, which is different from actually being okay. She told me once, when I was a teenager, that there were 2 ways to deal with something that bothered you. You could fight it, or you could accommodate it until it became the new normal. She said some things were worth fighting, and some things were better accommodated. I'd thought that was wisdom at the time. Now I was less sure. The thing that changed everything happened in January. Grandma called me on a Thursday evening, which was unusual. We usually talked on weekends. Her voice was careful in the way it got when she was worried about something, but didn't want to say so directly. She said she had a question about finances. She said she'd been going over some things, and she couldn't quite make them add up. I asked her what she meant. She said that the savings account, the one that was part of the trust, the one Grandpa had always called the rainy day account, she'd gotten a statement, and the balance was different from what she expected. I asked her how different. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, about $40,000 different. I drove over the next morning. She had the statement on the kitchen table. She'd put her reading glasses on top of it like she was done looking at it. I sat down and I read through the transaction history. There had been a series of withdrawals over 4 months, 8 of them, ranging from $3,000 to $9,000. Each one just under the $10,000 threshold that would trigger automatic reporting. They were spaced about 2 weeks apart. Grandma said she hadn't made those withdrawals. She said she'd only taken money from the account twice in the past year. Once for a dental bill and once for a new water heater. She showed me those receipts. They matched 2 entries on the statement. Every other withdrawal was not her. I asked her who else had access to the account. She got very quiet. She said that last spring, before they moved in, back when they were first talking about the arrangement, she had added my brother to the account, just so he could help her if she needed it, she said, just for convenience. She said she hadn't thought about it since. I put my hand over hers on the table and I told her we were going to figure this out. Here is what I did not do. I did not call my brother. I did not text him. I did not say anything to Grandma about what I was thinking until I had talked to Ms. Wentworth. Ms. Wentworth's voice, when I explained what I'd found, went very still and very focused in a way that I found oddly reassuring. She asked me how recently the last withdrawal had occurred. I told her 11 days ago. She said good. She said, don't touch the account, don't confront anyone, and come in tomorrow. I went in the next morning with the bank statement, the transaction history I'd photographed, and my notes from the conversation with Grandma. Ms. Wentworth looked at everything. She asked me several questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. Then she leaned back and she said, this is potentially elder financial abuse. In this state, that's not just a civil matter. She walked me through the options. We could report to Adult Protective Services. We could go directly to law enforcement. We could contact the bank and have the account frozen pending investigation. We could do all 3, she said. The order matters, and the timing matters. I asked her what she recommended. She said the first step was to have Grandma formally revoke my brother's account access. Today, if possible. And to do it at the bank, in person, with documentation. That closed the door on any further withdrawals immediately, without tipping anyone off about the larger investigation. She said we could file the APS report the same day if Grandma was willing. I drove back to Grandma's house. I sat with her for an hour. I explained everything as plainly as I could. I told her what the law considered this kind of withdrawal. I told her what her options were. I told her I would go with her, sit beside her, handle whatever she needed, and not pressure her toward any particular choice. She listened to all of it without interrupting, which wasn't like her. When I was done, she looked at the statement again for a long moment, then she says, I want to go to the bank today. We went to the bank. The branch manager was a calm, efficient woman who took us into a private office and listened to what Grandma said she needed. She made it clear to Grandma, without any prompting from me, that Grandma had the full right to revoke any authorized user from the account at any time and for any reason. Grandma said she understood. She said she'd like to do that now. The revocation was processed in about 20 minutes. The branch manager also, quietly, recommended that Grandma speak with the fraud department. She said the transaction pattern we were describing was something they would want to document. She said it carefully, professionally, without making Grandma feel foolish for having trusted someone. I watched Grandma handle all of this, and I thought about the woman who had stood in her garden coat watching a cardinal on the fence post 4 months ago, and I felt something I can only describe as grief, with a sharp edge to it. She shouldn't have had to do any of this, but she was doing it. Straight-backed, reading glasses on, signing her name clearly. We filed the APS report the next day. Ms. Wentworth helped us draft it. I am not going to describe the investigation in detail because some of it is still ongoing and because it involves legal matters I've been advised to be careful about discussing. What I can say is this. The pattern of withdrawals was documented. My brother's access to the account was confirmed. There was no record of any agreement, verbal or written, that authorized him to use the account for household expenses or any other purpose. He called me 3 days after we filed the report. He didn't know about the report yet. He called because Grandma had apparently said something vague to him about needing to make some changes to her accounts, and he'd put something together. He was not charming on this call. He was not effortless. His voice had a quality I'd never heard in it before. Something tight and a little high-pitched, the way voices get when someone is calculating very fast in real time. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said the money had been for household expenses. For groceries, utilities, things Grandma needed. He said he should have kept better records, but it wasn't what it looked like. I asked him if he had any receipts. He said he'd have to look. I said, okay, you might want to find those. Steph called me the next day. If my brother's call had been calculating, Steph's was something different. She was warm. She was sad. She said she could tell there was tension in the family. And she just wanted everyone to come together. She said my brother had made some poor decisions around the account, and he absolutely owned that. She said that phrase, he owns that. But she thought if we could all just sit down and talk it through, we could find a path forward that worked for everyone. I said I appreciated her reaching out. I said the situation was in the hands of people more qualified than me to sort it out. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, what does that mean? I said I thought she probably knew what it meant. That was the last conversation I had with either of them for a long time. My grandmother asked them to leave the house in February. She did it herself. She called my brother, and I know this because she told me about it afterward, not because I was there. She said she'd told him she needed her home back. She said she'd told him she loved him. She said she told him that what he had done was not something she could live alongside, and that she needed time, and that the door was not permanently closed, but it was closed for now. She said he'd cried. She said she had too. She told me this sitting at her kitchen table, in the same chair she'd been in the morning. I came and asked her about the account. Her reading glasses were in her hand, not on her face, and she was turning them over and over, in a way that made me think she hadn't slept. I didn't try to say anything that would make it better. There isn't anything that makes it better. When someone you've loved their whole life turns out to be capable of something like that, the right response isn't comfort. It's just to sit there. So I sat there. There's a thing people say when something like this happens in a family. They say I never thought he was capable of it. And I understand why people say it. I've said it. But when I'm being fully honest with myself, I think the more accurate version is, I saw the signs and I didn't know what to do with them. The car loan. The way he talked about money, always as if it were fluid, as if the line between his and someone else's were a suggestion. The apartment they'd always called temporary. The house they moved into without a formal agreement. None of those things are proof of anything on their own, but they're a pattern, and patterns matter. I wish I had done more sooner. I don't know that it would have prevented what happened, but I think about those 8 withdrawals, spaced 2 weeks apart, each one just under the reporting threshold, and I know that whoever was making those decisions was not doing it carelessly. That was deliberate, and it happened in a house where my grandmother made her morning coffee and fed her birds, and thought the people sleeping down the hall were there because they loved her. That is the part I have to live with, not what I did. What happened before I knew to do anything. Grandma is still in her house. The back porch did get fixed, eventually. I hired someone in the spring and we did it together on a Saturday, her in her barn coat telling me which boards were the worst. The garden is the same as it's always been. Her china cabinet is back in the dining room. My cousin Frederica comes over sometimes. My aunt has the guest room back. Things are quieter. Not sad quiet, just regular quiet, the way the house was before. My brother and I haven't spoken since February. I don't know if we ever will, in the way we used to, if we ever really did. Steph sent Grandma a card at Christmas that Grandma put on the counter, and then moved to a drawer without saying anything about it. I don't think my grandmother is okay in the straightforward sense of the word. I think she is continuing, which is its own kind of strength and its own kind of grief. She told me once, a long time ago, that the hardest thing about loving people was that you didn't get to choose who disappointed you. You just got to choose what you did next. She's choosing to still be here, in her house, with her garden and her birds and her reading glasses, and her accordion folder in the hall closet. She's choosing to let me come on Saturdays and sit with her. I'm choosing to show up. Some days that's all there is, and some days it's enough. And I'm learning not to need it to be more than that.